Marcus Mac Rodriguez was having the kind of day that made him question every life choice he'd ever made. Standing in the grease-stained kitchen of Big Pete's Burgers and Regret, he watched his latest culinary masterpiece, a bacon cheeseburger with hand-cut fries, get sent back because the customer wanted it more medium rare, despite ordering it well done. Again. 32 years old, Mac muttered to himself, scraping the perfectly cooked burger into the trash. Culinary school graduate, James Beard Award dreamer. And here I am, explaining to Karen from accounting why her burger can't be both well done and bleeding. That's when the ship landed. Not crashed, landed, right in the parking lot of Big Pete's, which was already impressive considering the potholes out there could swallow a Honda Civic. The ship looked like someone had taken a Gothic cathedral and taught it how to fly, all spires and dramatic angles that screamed, "We take ourselves very seriously." The aliens who emerged were even more dramatic. Picture a cross between a praying mantis and someone who exclusively shops at Hot Topic, and you're halfway there. They wore flowing black robes that billowed in the non-existent wind, and their elongated heads gave them a perpetually judgmental expression. Perfect for customer service, really. Their leader stepped forward, spreading forearms in what Mac assumed was either a greeting or a threat, hard to tell with aliens. "Greetings, primitive human settlement. I am Ambassador Krex of the Zephyrian Council. We come seeking cultural exchange." Big Pete, who had been smoking behind the dumpster, dropped his cigarette. "Ah, Mac, you handle this. I don't get paid enough for aliens." Mac wiped his hands on his apron and walked outside, because apparently his day needed more complications. "Welcome to Earth, I guess. You folks hungry? We've got a 2-for-1 special on disappointment burgers." Ambassador Krex tilted his head, consulting what looked like a space iPad. "We seek one human for our cultural exchange program. Our selection process has identified the optimal candidate." He looked directly at Mac. "Congratulations, Marcus Rodriguez. You have been chosen." "Chosen for what exactly?" "A great honor," Krex said, which in Mac's experience usually meant the opposite. "You will join us on Zephyros Prime for our most sacred festival, the Feast of Tender Gratitude." Behind Krex, another alien was taking notes. "Note the marbling," it whispered. "Excellent stress lines from food service work. This one has been properly tenderized by life circumstances." Mac's survival instincts, dulled by years of customer service, completely missed this red flag. Instead, he heard sacred festival and feast, and thought about his dream of cooking for appreciative audiences. "You want me to cook for your festival?" In a manner of speaking, Krex said with what might have been a smile. "Our lottery system selected you specifically. Very scientific, completely random, definitely not based on your muscle-to-fat ratio or your recent increase in stress-induced seasoning from working in food service." "Stress-induced seasoning? A delicacy where we come from." The other aliens nodded sagely, making more notes. "Should we discuss the marinade preparation?" one asked. "Not yet," Krex hissed. "Cultural sensitivity, remember?" Mac, however, was already mentally planning his menu. After years of slinging burgers for people who thought ketchup was a vegetable, the chance to cook for an alien civilization sounded like a dream come true. "When do we leave? And can I bring my equipment?" "Your equipment?" "My smoker, my spice collection, my knives. You know, the good stuff. I've got this dry rub recipe that'll change your life." The aliens exchanged glances. One of them made a note that read "Human offers" to season itself. "Certainly," Krex said. "Bring whatever you believe will enhance the experience." Mac grinned for the first time in months. "Give me an hour to pack." As he rushed back inside to grab his gear, he missed the aliens' excited chittering about willing participation and self-basting. Big Pete, however, caught enough to decide this was a good time for an extended smoke break. In another state, possibly another country. Mac emerged an hour later with his pride and joy, a custom-built offset smoker that he'd welded himself, along with 2 coolers full of rubs, sauces, and secret ingredients. "This baby can smoke a whole brisket in 12 hours, he said, patting the smoker affectionately. "Low and slow, that's the secret." "How wonderfully appropriate," Krex murmured. "We also prefer our meals prepared slowly, very slowly, with much anticipation." "Finally someone who appreciates the art," Mac said, loading his equipment onto their ship, with the help of some very confused-looking alien crew members. As the ship prepared for takeoff, Mac settled into what he assumed was a passenger seat, but was actually a serving platter. He gazed out the window at Earth shrinking below and felt optimistic for the first time in years. Behind him, Ambassador Krex was already drafting his report. Specimen acquired successfully. Human appears eager to participate in preparation process. Bring extra seasoning. It was going to be an interesting trip. The journey to Zephyros Prime took 3 days, during which Max spent most of his time in what he thought was the ship's galley, but was actually the food preparation chamber. The aliens watched with fascination as he organized his spices alphabetically and explained the difference between dry rubs and wet marinades to anyone who'd listen. "See, the key to good barbecue is patience," Max said, holding up a bottle of his signature dry rub. "You can't rush flavor. It's got to penetrate deep into the meat. Break down those tough fibers, make everything tender and juicy." The aliens took extensive notes. When they finally arrived at Zephyros Prime, Mac got his first good look at his new temporary home through the ship's viewport. The planet looked like someone had decorated a death metal album cover with mood lighting. Dark spires reached toward a blood-red sky, and everything seemed designed by someone who thought ominous was an interior design style. "Charming," Max said. "Very atmospheric, great for a themed restaurant." Ambassador Krex practically purred. "We think you'll find our local cuisine quite memorable." The landing pad was surrounded by what Mac generously assumed were welcoming committees, though they looked more like they were gathering for a public execution. Hundreds of Zephyrians had assembled, all wearing their dramatic black robes and carrying what appeared to be dining utensils. "Wow, word travels fast around here," Mac said, waving at the crowd. Several aliens fainted. That's when he met the local culinary establishment. Chef Gornek approached with the swagger of someone who'd never had his cooking criticized, mainly because critics tended to become ingredients. He was built like a linebacker who'd been stretched on a medieval rack, with forearms that ended in claws sharp enough to julienne a carrot or a vertebrae with equal efficiency. "So you are the human who thinks he can cook," Gornek said, his voice like gravel in a blender. "I don't think I can cook," Mac replied cheerfully. "I know I can cook. 20 years of experience, culinary school, and a smoker that's basically a religious artifact at this point." Next came Priestess Velcra, who looked like she'd been carved from obsidian in disappointment. Her 6 eyes glowed with the fervor of someone who took meal preparation very seriously. "The sacred feast requires precise preparation," she intoned. "Every detail must be perfect for the ritual consumption." "I totally agree," Mac said. "That's why I brought my meat thermometer. Temperature control is everything." Finally, Captain Thane stepped forward. Unlike the others, he looked skeptical rather than hungry. His warrior's bearing suggested he'd seen enough battles to recognize when something didn't add up. "Human, do you understand why you are here?" "Cultural exchange," Mac said promptly. Ambassador Krex explained it. "I'm here to cook for your feast of tender gratitude. Speaking of which, what's the guest count? I need to know how much brisket to smoke." The crowd murmured excitedly. Someone shouted, "He offers to prepare himself," which Mac assumed was a translation error. Captain Thane's expression grew more troubled. "Human, perhaps you should—" "Enough," Gornak interrupted. "Let us show our guests to the preparation chamber." They led Mac through the city, which looked like it had been designed by someone who thought welcoming was a dirty word. Every building seemed to lean inward menacingly, and the street vendors were selling things that looked suspiciously like body parts. Mac, however, was too busy admiring the architecture to notice the specifics. "Very Gothic," he commented. "Really commits to the theme." The preparation chamber turned out to be a massive kitchen that looked like it had been designed by medieval torturers with culinary aspirations. Crude grills, rusty knives, and what appeared to be a collection of stretching racks lined the walls. At the center sat a table that was definitely not for food prep, unless the food was human-sized. "Okay," Max said, surveying the space. "This is going to need some work. Where's your ventilation system, temperature control, food safety protocols?" The aliens exchanged glances. Chef Gornek stepped forward with what Mac would later realize was a meat cleaver the size of a tennis racket. "The preparation is simple. First, we secure the ingredient to ensure it cannot escape." "Escape?" Mac blinked. "Why would the ingredient escape? What are you cooking, angry lobsters?" "Then," Gornek continued, raising the cleaver, "we begin the tenderizing process." That's when several puzzle pieces clicked into place in Mac's brain. The lottery selection, based on his stress-induced seasoning, the comments about marbling and muscle-to-fat ratios, the massive cleaver currently being aimed at his head. "Oh," Mac said calmly. Oh, I see. You're cannibals. And I'm not the chef. I'm the main course. The entire room fell silent. Gornak paused mid-swing, apparently not expecting such a measured response. Mac looked around the room again, this time really seeing the bone decorations, the human-sized cooking implements, and the very obvious sacrificial altar masquerading as a prep table. Well, this is awkward. Priestess Velkara stepped forward, her 6 eyes glowing brighter. Do not fear, honored ingredient. Your sacrifice will nourish our people, and— Hang on, Mac interrupted, raising a hand. Before you start the whole ritual sacrifice thing, can I ask you a question? How's your food scene here? Like, quality-wise? The question clearly wasn't in their standard pre-meal script. Gornak lowered his cleaver slightly. Our food scene? Yeah, your cooking. How would you rate it? Scale of 1 to 10. Chef Gornak puffed up with pride. I am the greatest culinary artist on Zephyros Prime. My Screaming Liver Surprise has won awards. Screaming Liver Surprise, Mac repeated. Right, and your seasoning game? Spice variety? Cooking techniques? We use salt, Gornak said defensively. Sometimes we add the screaming for extra flavor. Mac nodded slowly. Salt and screaming. That's it? It is traditional. I'll bet it is. Mac looked around the room one more time, then made a decision that would either save his life or get him killed. In a more creative way. Okay, here's the thing. You guys clearly put a lot of effort into this whole feast preparation, and I respect that. But I think we're missing a huge opportunity here. Opportunity? Captain Thane asked, his hand moving to his weapon. You want to eat me, right? Fine. But wouldn't you rather eat the best version of me possible? Mac gestured to his smoker, which the aliens had dutifully carried in. I'm talking about real flavor, real technique, the kind of cooking that doesn't just fill your stomach, but touches your soul. The room was so quiet you could hear a mandible drop. I propose a deal, Mac continued. Give me one chance to show you what real cooking looks like. If my food isn't better than whatever Gornak here has been serving up, then you can proceed with the whole sacrificial feast thing. But if I win, he paused for dramatic effect, I become your head chef instead of your dinner. Ambassador Krex leaned forward. And if you lose? Mac shrugged. Then you get the best seasoned human in the galaxy. The aliens began chattering excitedly among themselves. This was clearly not how these things usually went. Chef Gornak slammed his cleaver into the prep table. Impossible. No one challenges the culinary traditions of Zephyros Prime. I'm not challenging your traditions, Mac said reasonably. I'm offering to upgrade them. The silence stretched on until Ambassador Krex cleared his throat, which sounded like grinding metal. This is unprecedented. Everything good starts with unprecedented, Max said. You think the first guy who decided to smoke a brisket was following tradition? No, he was a visionary, a pioneer, a man who looked at a tough piece of meat and said, I bet I can make this amazing if I just apply the right combination of time, temperature, and patience. Chef Gornak's 4 eyes narrowed to slits. You mock our ways, human. I'm not mocking anything, I'm just saying there's more to cooking than salt and screaming. Mac gestured around the primitive kitchen. Look at this setup. You've got the passion, you've got the dedication, but you're working with Stone Age techniques. It's like trying to paint the Mona Lisa with a stick dipped in mud. Priestess Velkara stepped forward, her obsidian features radiating offense. Our culinary rituals have sustained our people for millennia. And I'm sure they have, Mac said diplomatically. But sustained and satisfied are 2 different things. When's the last time someone finished a meal here and said, wow, that was incredible, I need the recipe? The aliens exchanged uncertain glances. Apparently this wasn't a common occurrence. Captain Thane crossed his arms. What exactly are you proposing, human? A cook-off. Me versus Chef Gornak. Same ingredients, different techniques. Let your people judge which approach produces better results. Mac pulled out his meat thermometer and twirled it like a gunslinger. If Gornak wins, you get your traditional feast, and I'll go quietly. But if I win, I become head chef of this operation, and we start running things my way. This is absurd, Gornak sputtered. I will not be challenged by food that cannot even defend itself. Actually, Max said, that's exactly the problem with your cooking philosophy. You're so focused on the intimidation factor that you've forgotten food is supposed to taste good. Ambassador Krex held up 4 hands for silence. The terms are acceptable. We shall convene the judgment of flavors. Wait, Captain Thane interjected. What if the human attempts to escape during this competition? Mac laughed. Escape? With my smoker? That thing weighs 400 pounds and takes 2 hours just to heat up properly. Besides, where am I going to go? This is an alien planet. I'd probably get eaten by something worse than you guys before I made it a mile. He makes a valid point, Velker admitted. Then it is settled, Krex declared. The challenge will take place at sunset, before the assembled masses. Each chef will prepare their finest dish using the traditional ingredients. About those ingredients, Mac said, what exactly are we working with here? Gornek's expression turned predatory. The finest selection on Zephyros Prime. Fresh Terran meat, perfectly aged and stressed for optimal flavor. Terran meat? Mac's eyes widened. You mean like Earth animals? Not animals, Gornak said with obvious relish. Humans. We have been collecting specimens for months in preparation for the feast. Mac felt his stomach drop. You've been collecting humans? Only the finest quality, Velkara assured him. Scientists, artists, philosophers, each one carefully selected for their unique flavor profiles. That's, Mac started, then stopped. Getting angry wouldn't help the situation, and it definitely wouldn't help the poor people who were apparently locked up somewhere as menu items. Okay, new rule. We're not using human meat. But that is the traditional ingredient, Gornak protested. Then we'll have to expand your culinary horizons, Mac said firmly. What else do you have? Captain Thane gestured toward a series of cages along the far wall. We maintain a selection of local fauna for variety. Mac walked over to investigate and immediately regretted it. The creatures in the cages looked like someone had taken every nightmare from a biology textbook and given them all anger management issues. There was something that appeared to be a cross between a lobster and a hate crime, another thing that looked like it was made entirely of teeth and bad intentions, and in the largest cage, something that could only be described as aggressively purple. These are your local animals? Mac asked. The scorn beast, Thane said, pointing to the lobster hate crime hybrid. Naturally aggressive, which tenderizes the meat through constant rage. The venk, he continued, indicating the teeth creature. 7 different types of venom, gives the meat a unique tingling sensation. And the zorblat, he finished, gesturing to the purple thing. It screams constantly, which adds to the flavor complexity. Max stared at the collection of alien nightmare fuel. Right, and how do you usually prepare these? We throw them in a pit with some salt and wait for them to stop moving, Gornek said proudly. That's not cooking, that's just organized animal cruelty, Mac rubbed his temples. Okay, here's what we're going to do. I'll work with your local ingredients, but we're going to treat them with some respect. These creatures deserve better than being tortured to death for marginal flavor enhancement. The aliens looked confused. Velkara tilted her head. You wish to honor the food. I wish to cook the food properly. There's a difference between extracting flavor through technique and just making things suffer because you think suffering equals seasoning. Mac opened his spice kit and started laying out containers. Real flavor comes from understanding your ingredients, not traumatizing them. Blasphemy, Gornek roared. The screaming is essential. The screaming is just noise, Max shot back. You want complex flavors? I'll give you complex flavors, but we're doing this right. He turned to address the growing crowd of aliens who had packed into the preparation chamber. Ladies and gentlemen of Zephyros Prime, you're about to witness something special. Not just a cook-off, but a demonstration of what happens when you combine respect for your ingredients with actual technique. Mac fired up his smoker, and the familiar sound of the gas igniting brought him a sense of calm. This is going to take some time, so I hope you're all comfortable. Good barbecue can't be rushed. How long? Ambassador Krex asked. For proper results, about 6 hours for the Scorn Beast, 4 for the Venk, and probably 8 for whatever that purple thing is. The crowd murmured in disbelief. Chef Gornek laughed. 6 hours? I can have my screaming liver surprise ready in 30 minutes. And that, Max said, beginning to season the first creature with a careful blend of spices, is exactly why you're going to lose. As Mac worked, explaining his process to the fascinated aliens, he couldn't help but notice Captain Thane watching him with growing interest. The warrior had picked up one of Mac's spice containers and was examining it like it contained the secrets of the universe. What is this? Thane asked, holding up a bottle of paprika. That's paprika. It's made from dried peppers. Adds a smoky sweetness and a beautiful color. Thane uncapped the bottle and inhaled deeply. His expression changed completely. going from skeptical warrior to someone experiencing a religious awakening. This is magnificent. Wait until you taste what it does to meat, Mac said with a grin. Around them, the crowd was growing larger as words spread throughout the city. Apparently, public cook-offs weren't a common form of entertainment on Zephyros Prime, probably because most of their food preparation involved screaming rather than seasoning. "Let the challenge begin," Ambassador Krex announced. Mac looked at his smoker, now producing perfect white clouds of aromatic smoke, then at Chef Gornak, who was already hacking away at something that was still trying to escape. "Game on," Mac muttered, and got to work. The next 6 hours turned into the most bizarre cooking show in galactic history. On one side of the preparation chamber, Chef Gornak worked with the frantic energy of someone who believed that violence was a seasoning. On the other, Mac moved with the deliberate precision of a master craftsman who understood that great food required patience, technique, and a healthy respect for the laws of physics. "First rule of barbecue," Mac announced to his growing audience as he carefully examined the scorn beast. "Know your protein. This little guy here has been stressed out of his mind, which means his muscles are going to be tough as boot leather unless we treat him right." The scorn beast, which looked like someone had crossed a lobster with a bad attitude and a chainsaw, clicked its claws menacingly. Mac nodded approvingly. "See that muscle tension? That's what happens when you live your whole life ready to fight. We need to break that down, slowly, let those fibers relax." Meanwhile, Gornak was attacking his own scorn beast with what appeared to be a medieval mace. "Tenderize through trauma," he bellowed, each blow accompanied by increasingly distressed sounds from his ingredient. "Break down the resistance." "That's not tenderizing," Mac called over. "That's just making hamburger with extra steps." Mac began his prep work with the methodical care of a surgeon. First, he humanely dispatched the scorn beast with a quick, clean cut that silenced its clicking immediately. "Stress hormones ruin the meat," he explained to the fascinated crowd. "You want the animal calm when it dies, not terrified." Several aliens in the audience exchanged glances. This was apparently a revolutionary concept. Next came the dry rub, and this was where Mac's years of experimentation paid off. He'd spent the journey studying the alien spice samples Krex had provided, and he'd developed what he was calling his intergalactic blend. Paprika for color and sweetness, cumin for earthiness, a local zephyrin root that tasted like garlic's more interesting cousin, and his secret weapon, a spice derived from earth jalapenos that he'd smuggled in his personal kit. "The key to a good rub is balance," Mac said, massaging the spice mixture into the scorn beast's shell with practiced hands. "You want heat, but not so much that it overwhelms the natural flavors. You want sweetness to balance the salt, earthiness to ground the more exotic notes." Captain Thane had positioned himself at the front of the crowd, holding Mac's paprika container like a religious artifact. "Tell me more about this balance," he said, clearly mesmerized. "Think of it like combat," Mac said, knowing his audience. "You've got different weapons for different situations, right? You don't use a warhammer when you need a precision blade. Same with spices. Each one has a job to do." He moved on to the Venk, the creature that was basically a mouthful of teeth with delusions of being a vertebrate. "Now this guy's going to be interesting. 7 different venoms means 7 different flavor compounds. Most people would try to neutralize them, but I'm thinking we can work with them." "Work with poison?" Velker asked, sounding intrigued despite herself. "Capsaicin is technically a poison," Max said, carefully filleting the Venk. "So is alcohol. The difference between poison and seasoning is usually just a matter of dosage and preparation." He created a special marinade for the Venk, using acidic local fruits to neutralize the more dangerous toxins, while preserving the ones that would add unique flavor notes. Low and slow cooking will break down most of the harmful compounds while concentrating the interesting ones. Across the chamber, Gornak was making his signature screaming liver surprise, which appeared to involve throwing random organs into a pot and hoping for the best. The screaming component came from the fact that some of the organs were still technically alive, writhing around in what Mac could only describe as culinary torture. 15 minutes, Gornak announced proudly. "Traditional speed." 15 minutes, Mac repeated, shaking his head. "You can't even get a proper sear in 15 minutes, let alone develop complex flavors." The real showstopper was the Zorblat, the aggressively purple creature that had been providing a constant soundtrack of angry shrieking since Mac had arrived. It was roughly the size of a small pig, covered in what appeared to be fur made of tiny tentacles, and it had been screaming non-stop for what must have been hours. "Poor guy's probably got a sore throat," Mac said sympathetically. "Let's see if we can help him out." He approached the cage slowly, speaking in soothing tones. Hey there, buddy. I know this situation sucks, but I'm going to make sure you go out with dignity, okay? The Zorblat's screaming actually quieted to a confused whimper. Several aliens gasped. How did you do that? Velkera whispered. Turns out most creatures respond well to being treated like living beings instead of ingredients, Max said, carefully opening the cage. Revolutionary concept, I know. The Zorblat allowed Mac to lift it out of the cage without resuming its screaming. Mac dispatched it quickly and cleanly, then began the most complex prep work of his career. The purple meat had an unusual, marbled pattern that reminded him of Wagyu beef, but with a texture that suggested it might be more like duck. This is going to need a different approach, Mac mused, studying the meat. Something between a confit and a slow roast, maybe wrapped in local leaves to keep the moisture in. He found some broad, aromatic leaves growing in pots around the chamber and created an elaborate wrap, seasoning the Zorblat with a complex blend that included local herbs, earth spices, and a sauce made from fermented alien fruits that he'd been experimenting with. By this point, the crowd had grown to fill the entire chamber and spill out into the corridors beyond. Word had spread throughout the city that something unprecedented was happening in the preparation chamber, and apparently half of Zephyros Prime had decided to witness it. Note the smoke production, Max said, gesturing to his smoker, which was now producing steady clouds of aromatic smoke that had the entire alien audience transfixed. This is what happens when you control your heat source. Consistent temperature, clean combustion, and the right combination of wood chips for flavor complexity. The smoke itself had become a source of fascination. Several aliens were trying to capture it in containers, while others were simply standing in the smoke clouds with expressions of pure bliss. What manner of sorcery is this? One alien called out. It's not sorcery, it's science, Mac replied, checking his thermometer. Proper airflow management, temperature control, and understanding how different woods impart different flavors. This particular blend includes earth hickory for the base smoke, local Zephyrian darkwood for sweetness, and a touch of applewood for that fruity note. Chef Gornek, meanwhile, was putting the finishing touches on his screaming liver surprise. It looked exactly like what you'd expect from something called screaming liver surprise. A writhing, bubbling mass of organs in various stages of distress, seasoned with what appeared to be nothing but salt and regret. Behold, Gornak announced, the traditional feast of our ancestors. The crowd's attention was divided between Gornek's aggressively traditional dish and Mac's smoker, which had reached the perfect temperature and was now working its slow magic on 3 completely different preparations. Captain Thane had worked his way closer to Mac's station and was watching every move with the intensity of someone learning the deepest secrets of the universe. The patience required for this process, he said. It's like preparing for a long campaign. Exactly, Mac said, pleased that someone was getting it. Good barbecue is like good strategy. You plan ahead, you control your resources, you adapt to changing conditions, and you never rush the critical moments. He opened the smoker to check on his progress, and the aroma that escaped made half the alien audience swoon. The Scorn Beast was developing a beautiful mahogany color, the Vank was starting to caramelize around the edges, and the Zorblat was releasing juices that smelled like a cross between duck confit and something that didn't exist on Earth but should have. Temperature check, Mac announced, sliding his thermometer into the Scorn Beast. We're looking for internal temperature of about 160 degrees Zephyrin, which should correspond to perfect doneness without drying out the meat. How do you know the correct temperature? Velcray asked, genuinely curious. Experience, mostly, but also understanding the science. Different proteins denature at different temperatures. Cook them too little, and you don't break down the tough fibers. Cook them too much, and you squeeze out all the moisture and flavor. As the hours passed, Mac continued his commentary, turning the cook-off into an impromptu masterclass in culinary technique. He explained everything from the Maillard reaction to the importance of resting meat, from the role of salt in flavor enhancement to the way different cooking methods affected texture. The alien audience was completely captivated. Many were taking notes, and Mac noticed several of them sneaking tastes of his various spice blends when they thought no one was looking. Final temperature check, Mac announced as the sun began to set over Zephyros Prime. Scorn Beast is perfect, Vank is beautifully caramelized, and the Zorblat. He opened the leaf wrapping to reveal meat so tender it was practically falling apart. The Zorblat is ready to change your entire understanding of what food can be. Gornik's screaming liver surprise had stopped screaming about an hour ago, mostly because everything in it had finally died. It sat in its pot like a challenge to the concept of edible food, gray and lifeless, despite being technically cooked. Ladies and gentlemen, Ambassador Krex announced, the time has come for the judgment of flavors. The judging panel assembled like a tribunal of culinary destiny. Ambassador Krex took his place at the center, flanked by Priestess Velkara and 3 other high-ranking Zephyrians whose titles Mac couldn't pronounce, but whose expressions suggested they took food very seriously. Captain Thane, despite not being an official judge, positioned himself close enough to witness every bite. The traditional preparation will be sampled first, Krex announced, gesturing toward Gornek's creation. Chef Gornek stepped forward with his screaming liver surprise, which had thankfully stopped screaming but now resembled something that belonged in a medical waste container rather than on a plate. The gray, lumpy mass sat in its pot like a challenge to the very concept of appetite. "Behold," Gornek declared with the pride of someone who had never questioned whether screaming actually improved flavor, "the ancestral feast of Zephyros Prime, prepared in the traditional manner passed down through countless generations." The judges approached the pot with the solemnity of people performing a sacred duty. Velkara lifted a spoonful of the gray mass, studied it for a moment, then placed it in her mouth. Her expression remained neutral for exactly 3 seconds before her face contorted in what Mac could only describe as diplomatic disgust. "It has," she said carefully, "the traditional flavor profile." The other judges took their samples, each one maintaining the same diplomatic poker face that suggested they were experiencing something between food poisoning and existential crisis. One judge's eyes began watering. Another made a sound that might have been appreciation but sounded more like suppressed retching. "The texture," one judge managed, "is authentically challenging. The flavor complexity," another added, "remains traditional." Mac watched this performance with growing understanding. These weren't expressions of culinary satisfaction. These were the faces of people who had been eating terrible food for so long that they'd convinced themselves it was supposed to taste like punishment. "And now," Ambassador Krex announced, with obvious relief at being able to stop eating Gornek's creation, "the human preparation." Mac stepped forward with his trio of plates, each one carefully arranged to showcase the natural beauty of properly prepared food. The scorn beast glistened with a mahogany glaze, its shell open to reveal meat that was perfectly white and flaky. The venk had been sliced into medallions that showed off the beautiful caramelization and the complex marbling of flavors. And the zorblat, still wrapped in its aromatic leaves, released clouds of fragrant steam when Mac opened the presentation. "Ladies and gentlemen," Mac said, "I present to you the same ingredients you've always used, but prepared with respect, technique, and about 6 hours of patience." The judges approached Mac's display, and their expressions changed immediately. Where Gornek's dish had prompted diplomatic endurance, Mac's food inspired something approaching wonder. The aromas alone were clearly affecting them in ways they hadn't expected. Velka reached for the first sample, a piece of the scorn beast. She lifted it carefully, studying the perfect color and texture, then placed it in her mouth. Her eyes widened immediately. For a long moment she said nothing. She chewed slowly, her expression cycling through surprise, confusion, and what appeared to be the early stages of a religious experience. "This is," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper, "impossible." The other judges crowded forward, each taking samples of the scorn beast. The reaction was immediate and universal. Eyes widened, mandibles dropped, and several aliens made sounds that Mac was pretty sure indicated pleasure, but could have been the alien equivalent of having their minds blown. "How?" one judge managed. "How is this the same creature?" "Same creature, different approach," Mac said. "You've been treating your ingredients like enemies to be defeated. I treated them like partners in creating something beautiful." Captain Thane, unable to contain himself any longer, reached for a sample. The moment the perfectly seasoned, properly cooked scorn beast hit his palate, his entire worldview shifted. This was a warrior who had conquered planets, commanded fleets, and faced down cosmic horrors, and he was brought to his knees by a properly applied dry rub and 6 hours of controlled smoking. "By the void," he breathed, "what sorcery is this?" "It's not sorcery," Mac said patiently. "It's just good technique." The dry rub broke down the tough proteins while adding flavor complexity. The slow smoking process kept the meat moist while developing that outer crust. The controlled temperature ensured even cooking throughout. But the judges weren't listening to his explanation. They had moved on to the Venk medallions, and their reactions were even more dramatic. The careful balance Mac had achieved between the creature's natural venoms and his complementary seasonings created flavor profiles that simply didn't exist in Zephyrian cuisine. "Sweet and heat," Velkata murmured. tears streaming down her obsidian cheeks. "How did you know to balance the toxins with sweetness?" "Chemistry," Mac said. "Most venoms are alkaline, so acids neutralize the dangerous compounds while preserving the interesting flavor notes. A little sweetness balances the heat, and the slow cooking process concentrates everything into something completely new." The crowd of spectators was pressing closer, trying to catch even the faintest whiff of Mac's creations. Several aliens had started openly weeping, apparently overwhelmed by the discovery that food could be something other than an endurance test. But it was the Zorblat that truly broke them. When Ambassador Krex unwrapped the leaf-steamed creation and took his first bite, his reaction was immediate and profound. The carefully balanced seasonings, the perfect texture achieved through controlled slow cooking, and the natural flavors of the meat that had been enhanced rather than masked created something that transcended mere food and entered the realm of art. Krex chewed slowly, his 4 eyes closing in what appeared to be meditation. When he opened them again, he looked at Mac with an expression that mixed reverence with complete bewilderment. "Human," he said softly, "what have you done?" "I cooked dinner," Mac said simply, "the way it's supposed to be cooked." The judging panel was in complete disarray. Several judges were openly sobbing. One had fallen to his knees and was making what Mac assumed were prayers to whatever deity governed good food. Captain Thane was staring at his empty plate like it held the secrets of the universe. "This is unprecedented," Velcaro whispered. "In all the millennia of our culinary traditions, we have never experienced anything approaching this level of flavor," Mac suggested. "Transcendence," she corrected. Chef Gornak, watching his entire worldview crumble in real time, stepped forward with his massive cleaver raised. "This is impossible. Food is not supposed to bring joy. It is supposed to provide sustenance through suffering." "Says who?" Mac asked reasonably. "Food is one of life's great pleasures. It brings people together, it nourishes the soul as well as the body, and it should make you happy, not traumatized." The crowd was murmuring agreement, many of them nodding as if Mac had just articulated something they'd always felt but never been able to express. Ambassador Krex stood slowly, his expression grave with the weight of making a decision that would reshape their entire civilization. "The judgment is clear," he announced. "The human's preparation is superior in every measurable way. The flavors are more complex, the textures more pleasing, and the overall experience transcends mere sustenance to achieve what can only be described as artistry." The crowd erupted in cheers, though Mac noticed many of the cheers sounded more like sobs of relief. "Furthermore," Krex continued, "in accordance with the terms of the challenge, Marcus Rodriguez is hereby appointed head chef of Zephyros Prime, with full authority over all culinary operations." Chef Gornek let out a roar of fury and charged forward with his cleaver, but Captain Thane intercepted him with the speed of someone who had just discovered the meaning of life through proper seasoning. "Stand down, Gornek," Thane ordered, his warrior's authority reinforced by the zealotry of a new convert. "The human has shown us the path to culinary enlightenment. We would be fools to reject such wisdom." Gornek looked around the chamber, seeing nothing but faces filled with wonder and gratitude directed at the human who had just revolutionized their understanding of food. Slowly, his cleaver lowered. "But the traditions," he said weakly. "The traditions," Priestess Valkara said, still wiping tears from her cheeks, "were clearly inadequate. We have been living in culinary darkness, mistaking suffering for flavor, brutality for technique." She turned to Mac with something approaching worship in her 6 eyes. "Master Chef Rodriguez, will you teach us these sacred methods?" Mac looked around the chamber full of reformed cannibals who were all staring at him like he'd just shown them fire for the first time. It wasn't exactly how he'd planned to spend his career, but it beat working at Big Pete's. "Yeah," he said, rolling up his sleeves. "I think we can work something out." 6 months later, Mac stood on the observation deck of his flagship restaurant, the Smoky Tentacle, watching the sunset paint the sky of Zephyros Prime in shades of crimson and gold. Below him, the city had transformed from a Gothic nightmare into something that could almost be described as welcoming, if you squinted and ignored the architecture that still looked like it had been designed by someone with serious commitment issues. Regarding the concept of cheerful, the changes had been dramatic and swift. Within weeks of his victory over Chief Gornak, Mac had established the first intergalactic culinary academy, with campuses on 17 different worlds and a waiting list that stretched across 3 star systems. His cookbook, Barbecue Across the Galaxy, A Human's Guide to Not Poisoning Aliens, had become the best-sellered publication in Zephyrian history. though admittedly their previous literary achievements had been limited to religious texts about the spiritual significance of screaming food. "Master Chef," Captain Thane said, approaching with the reverent manner he'd adopted ever since his paprika revelation. He now served as Mac's head of security and chief evangelist for proper seasoning techniques. "The morning reports from the outer colonies." Mac accepted the tablet, scanning through updates from his rapidly expanding culinary empire. The Regalians had finally mastered the art of low and slow cooking, though they were still struggling with the concept that not everything needed to be cooked at plasma temperatures. The Centaurians had embraced smoking with religious fervor, building temple smokers that could be seen from orbit, and the Andromedans had developed 17 new varieties of space-grown herbs specifically designed to complement Mac's signature rubs. "How's the Earth Liaison program going?" Mac asked. "Better than expected," Thane replied. "Ambassador Krex's requests for additional culinary ambassadors have been met with surprising enthusiasm. Apparently many of your species are eager to spread proper cooking techniques throughout the galaxy." Mac smiled, remembering Krex's last report to Earth's government. The ambassador had completely missed the irony of requesting more humans for cultural exchange, having somehow failed to mention that the original plan had involved eating them. Earth's government, thrilled at the prospect of intergalactic cultural outreach and completely unaware of the near cannibalism incident, had approved a full exchange program. The result was that some of Earth's finest chefs were now scattered across the galaxy, teaching aliens the difference between cuisine and culinary war crimes. Mac had received reports of miraculous transformations from former warrior cultures, who had discovered that properly prepared food was far more satisfying than conquest, and several planets had declared galactic peace after experiencing their first taste of properly seasoned anything. "And Gornak?" Mac asked. Thane's expression softened. "He's making excellent progress in the rehabilitation program. His brisket yesterday achieved what I can only describe as adequate seasoning. He only screamed at the meat twice during preparation, which is a significant improvement." Mac nodded approvingly. The former chef's conversion to proper cooking techniques had been slower than the others, but Mac believed in redemption through education. Gornak was now enrolled in Mac's anger management through proper seasoning program, learning to channel his aggressive tendencies into the more productive pursuit of perfect bark formation on smoked meats. "Master Chef," Priestess Velkara called from the restaurant floor below. She had traded her ominous black robes for a chef's apron that read, "Kiss the cook, but mind the 6 arms," and her religious fervor had been redirected toward the sacred art of sauce preparation. "The evening service is about to begin. Your presence would honor us." Mac made his way down to the kitchen, where his staff of reformed cannibals worked with the precision of a military unit and the passion of true believers. The transformation had been remarkable. Where once they had approached food preparation with the enthusiasm of medieval torturers, they now moved with the fluid grace of artists creating edible masterpieces. The kitchen itself bore no resemblance to the horrific preparation chamber where Mac had first challenged their culinary worldview. State-of-the-art smokers lined one wall, each one precisely calibrated and lovingly maintained. Temperature-controlled storage units held an array of spices that would have made Gordon Ramsay weep with joy. And in the center of it all, Mac's original smoker sat like a shrine, still in daily use but now surrounded by offerings of perfectly prepared alien delicacies. "Tonight's specials?" Mac asked, reviewing the menu. "Andorian glacier beast with your signature dry rub," Velkar reported. "Slow smoked for 14 hours until it achieves perfect tenderness. Venusian flame newt in the traditional Earth Carolina-style sauce. And for our adventurous diners, Plutonian iceworm, prepared with your revolutionary respect-the-ingredient methodology." Mac nodded approvingly. Each dish represented months of experimentation, learning to work with alien biology and chemistry to create flavors that transcended species barriers. The Andorian glacier beast, for example, had initially seemed impossible to cook properly due to its crystalline muscle structure, but Mac had discovered that a long, slow smoke at precisely 225 degrees Fahrenheit could transform it into something that tasted like the cosmic intersection of brisket and sea bass. The evening service began, and Mac watched with pride as his staff moved through their stations with choreographed precision. Former torture enthusiasts now plated dishes with artistic flair. Ex-cannibals discussed wine pairings with sophisticated palates. Captain Thane, who had appointed himself sommelier despite having no formal training, guided customers through flavor profiles with the tactical expertise of someone planning a military campaign. The customers themselves represented the new reality of Zephyros Prime. Where once the population had gathered only for ritual feasts involving screaming and suffering, they now came together to celebrate the simple joy of well-prepared food. Families shared meals and actually smiled while eating. Business deals were concluded over properly seasoned protein, rather than ritualistic intimidation. Children grew up understanding that food was supposed to taste good, not serve as a character-building exercise in endurance. "Master Chef," a young Zephyrin approached nervously. This was Crix, one of Mac's most promising students in the Culinary Academy. "I have completed the assignment you gave me." Mac accepted the plate that Crix offered. It was a simple preparation of local root vegetables, but they had been treated with care and seasoned with understanding rather than random violence. Mac took a bite and nodded approvingly. "Good knife work," he said. "Even seasoning distribution. You're learning to listen to the ingredients instead of trying to dominate them. This is exactly what I want to see." Critch's eyes literally glowed with pride. "I used the meditation techniques you taught us. I tried to understand what the vegetables wanted to become rather than forcing them into submission. That's the difference between cooking and food abuse," Mac said. "And you're getting it." As the evening progressed, Mac moved through the dining room, checking on customers and overseeing the service. At one table, a group of former warrior priests discussed the philosophical implications of proper seasoning. At another, a family was teaching their children how to appreciate the subtle complexity of Mac's signature sauce. In the corner, Ambassador Crex was entertaining a delegation from the Tau Ceti system, using Mac's food as diplomatic leverage to negotiate what appeared to be a galaxy-wide peace treaty. "The irony," Mac mused to Captain Thane, "is that they originally invited me here to eat me, and now they can't imagine eating anything I haven't prepared." Thane nodded gravely. "Your arrival marked the end of our dark age of culinary ignorance. We were barbarians, living in a world without proper seasoning or temperature control." "You were never barbarians," Mac corrected. "You were just working with incomplete information. Everyone has the potential to create something beautiful if they're given the right tools and techniques." As the night wound down and the last customers finished their meals with expressions of satisfied bliss, Mac began planning for the next phase of expansion. Reports were coming in from across the galaxy about civilizations that had never experienced proper food preparation. The vegan empire, despite their name, had apparently been living on nothing but nutritionally complete but flavorless paste for centuries. The silicon-based life forms of the crystalline worlds had never considered that their mineral-based diet could be enhanced with proper preparation techniques. "Master Chef?" Velkara approached with a communication tablet. "We've received a priority message from Earth." Mac accepted the device and read the message from Earth's Culinary Exchange Program. His success on Zephyros Prime had not gone unnoticed, and apparently, several other alien civilizations had submitted requests for their own cultural exchange programs. The requests were suspiciously similar to the original Zephyrine invitation, with lots of mentions of honored guests and traditional feasts and sacred preparation ceremonies. "They still don't get it, do they?" Mac said, showing the message to Thane. "It appears not," Thane replied, "though I suspect they will learn, as we did." Mac looked around his restaurant, filled with the happy chatter of satisfied customers and the aromatic evidence of proper cooking techniques. 6 months ago, these same aliens had been preparing to literally cook and eat him. Now they treated him like a combination of culinary deity and beloved teacher. The transformation had been so complete that many of them seemed to have genuinely forgotten their original cannibalistic intentions. "You know what?" Mac said, making a decision that would reshape the galaxy's understanding of food. "Send word to Earth. Tell them I'm accepting all requests for culinary exchange programs." "All of them?" Velkara asked, clearly impressed by the scope of such an undertaking. "Out of them," Mac confirmed. "If there are civilizations out there living without proper seasoning, without understanding the joy that comes from well-prepared food, then it's our responsibility to help them." He gestured toward his staff, his converted cannibal family, who had found purpose and happiness through the simple act of learning to cook properly. "Besides, we've got the best teaching staff in the galaxy. Former food terrorists who've seen the light make the most dedicated evangelists for proper technique." Captain Thane straightened to attention. "The culinary crusade begins?" "The culinary crusade begins," Mac confirmed. "We're going to spread proper cooking techniques across the galaxy, one reformed cannibal civilization at a time." As the staff began closing procedures for the night, Mac stood once more on his observation deck, looking out over the transformed city of Zephyros Prime. The Gothic architecture still looked vaguely threatening, but now it was softened by the warm glow emanating from restaurants, cooking schools, and spice markets that had sprung up throughout the city. In the distance, construction was underway on the galaxy's first intergalactic culinary university, complete with dormitories for students from across the known universe, research kitchens for developing new techniques, and a massive testing facility where the galaxy's worst cooking could be safely contained and gradually improved. Master Chef, Crix approached with a final report. All stations are clean and prepared for tomorrow's service. The smokers are maintaining perfect temperature and the fermentation chambers for next week's special sauces are progressing beautifully. Excellent work, Mac said, and meant it. 6 months ago, you were preparing to eat sentient beings. Tonight, you created food that brought joy to hundreds of customers. That's not just personal growth, that's evolution. As his staff departed for the night, each one stopping to thank him for the day's lessons and to share their excitement about tomorrow's challenges, Mac reflected on the strange turn his life had taken. He'd gone from flipping burgers at Big Pete's to running a galactic culinary empire, from facing unemployment to being worshipped as a deity of proper seasoning. The communication tablet chimed with another message from Earth. More requests for culinary ambassadors, more civilizations that had somehow missed the memo about food being supposed to taste good. Each request represented another world of beings who had never experienced the simple pleasure of a properly prepared meal, another opportunity to transform suffering into satisfaction. Max smiled, already planning menus for species he'd never heard of, imagining the look of wonder on alien faces when they tasted their first properly seasoned protein. Tomorrow, he would begin training the next wave of culinary missionaries, former cannibals who would carry the gospel of good food to the darkest corners of the galaxy. It wasn't the career he'd planned, but as he looked out over his transformed world, filled with the sounds of laughter and the aromas of properly prepared food, Mac couldn't imagine wanting to be anywhere else. After all, everyone deserved to know what good food tasted like. Even the aliens, who had originally planned to eat him. Especially them.